Well, hello everybody. Owen Sound Poet Laureate for 2019-2021. Richard Sitoski here with another video in the Practice of Poetry series. And today we're going to be looking at prompts. Now, some prompts are designed to generate whole poems, but in general, they're not. Mostly they serve as what I'd like to think of in musical terms as scales, or in visual arts terms as sketching, especially life drawing. Just as a musician practices scales to exercise their muscle memory and get fluidity in terms of technique, these prompts that, most of the prompts that you do will exercise your idea muscles, and they'll increase the correctness and fluidity of your writing technique. Or, to put it a different way, in terms of sketching, they also increase your powers of observation as a writer, representation, and empathy. And empathy is a very important one. It helps you put yourself in the position of not only your reader, but the personas that you're going to adopt when writing poems. And the upshot here is really that you should never wait for your muse. You should never wait for inspiration to strike, because your muse, chances are, is going to be on some sort of permanent vacation, and it's your job to go down to Cancun and bring her back home. I don't use prompts and exercises quite in the way that most people do, in the sense that most books recommend have various techniques and things like that. I usually get my prompting from the poets that I read. Usually I'll be reading something and a word will inspire me, or a line, especially a good line will get me going. And it'll get me thinking laterally in some other way, and sort of just take me on its own little journey somewhere else. And that's where I'll follow it to its eventual destination. And that often results in a poem. But here's an example of where I took a line or an idea from a previous poem, that's a poem that somebody had written, and let it generate something of my own. And it's from a Robert Priest poem, If You Just Want to Drop Something. It's from an amazing book called The Mad Hand, and we've got that in the library. And the conceit was, instead of bombs, what if you drop pianos in the sea, or glass gondolas on parking lots, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of surrealistic imagery that Robert Priest likes to use. And that led me then to question the circumstances for doing anything at all. Why do we do with what we do? Whom do we do it with? Under what circumstances? So that led not just to a poem, but to an exercise that I would like to use in a workshop setting. And it starts off with, if you want to blank something, well, you start by filling that blank with a verb, any verb you want, any verb you want. And then you ask yourself, how would you do it? To whom would you do it? With whom, where, with what, why, under what circumstances, and so on and so forth. Every possible question you could possibly ask about this thing. And then you write each answer as a line, and then organize those lines in a way that makes sense, or not, as the case may be. If you want to go for something a little bit more abstract, you can kind of play around with that. And it gave me something like this. And of course, if you know me, you know that I go for dark words. And I thought to myself, what if you wanted to kill something? But bear with me, this doesn't go exactly where you think it's going to go. So I said to myself, if you want to kill something, kill the white space on the canvas. Kill it with colors found only on tropical birds. Kill it with colors only bees can see. If you want to kill something, kill those white curtains, let in the light. If you want to kill something, kill that white sofa, the one where you and your brother sit comfortably 2 feet and 6,000 miles apart. So my concerns, the concerns that usually animate my verse, such as conformity, complacency, communication, and crap design, all these important moral issues, they show up here. And what wound up happening then is that I've got a nice little tidy poem out of this inspiration, this potential exercise. And I'd urge every one of you to try the same thing with that, with the if you want to blank something exercise. Another thing I came up with is skeleton, and this actually came out of a very specific response to a very specific exercise, where again, I kind of turned it on its head and did something completely weird with it. So this is based on an exercise called Tonal Variations from the Sweeney and Williams book, Writing Poetry, and that's a great book. I've got it recommended to you. It takes the form of a dialogue between person A and person B. What you're supposed to do, according to Sweeney and Williams, is to establish the tone or emotion, which is going to be different every time the interlocutors speak. So what you have is person A saying something in a pleasant manner, and then person B responds in a loving manner. And then person A will respond suspiciously, and then person B will be irritated. And what you're supposed to do is, in the lines of dialogue that you make, have those emotions come out. Well, I can never leave well enough alone. I can never do what people tell me to do. So I thought it'd be interesting not to use it just as an exercise in persona and emotion, but as a prompt for an entire poem on communication. So I thought to myself, what would happen if the text of a dialogue were removed and all we were left was the emotional content? In other words, those emotional cues that Sweeney and Williams do, what if we had just those and that constituted the poem? The result was a tandem's performance piece that I can bring to the stage with another person, and it can be endlessly modified to reflect different tonal registers and different emotional outcomes. So it's the type of thing that you actually kind of have to see on stage to really get the gist of it. So I'll try to throw this at you here, just one person doing both voices. Cordial, inquisitive, genial, expansive, regaled, curious, nonplussed, sympathetic, disappointed, irritated, perplexed, exasperated, galled, furious, persecuted, insulted, sarcastic, chastened, abashed, unimpressed, conciliatory, cautious, amicable, wheedling, disgusted, desperate, dismissive, mortified, repelled, bereft, rueful, forsaken, rueful, bereft. So that gives you a bit of a strange kind of poem to read on the page, but as a tandem piece between two spoken word artists or actors or anything like that, you'd have something that I think is actually quite interesting. May or may not be successful, I don't know. We'll have to see what it looks like on the stage. So that's just kind of an example of how I use prompts and how I get prompted by a variety of things in the things that I read. And here's are 3 resources that we have at the library, which are just full of these types of prompts and exercises. The first, Sage Cohen, Writing the Life Poetic. It's a book that I have to admit that I've only skimmed up to date, but it looks okay. But the 2 books that I would certainly recommend are Bill Herbert's Writing Poetry, and that takes a much more holistic approach to how to put together a poem. It's not just about the exercises and the prompts, but it's how you actually think about putting together poems. So it's very much geared towards finished pieces. And Matthew Sweeney and John Hartley Williams' book, Writing Poetry, which comes extremely highly recommended. I mean, that's almost a course in and of itself. And the thing to remember is that Herbert, Sweeney, and Williams are all practicing poets with an established reputation. And so you're in pretty good hands with them. So, as usual, I'd like to thank David Medill, CFP of BMO Nesbitt Burns, and former library CEO Andrew Armitage for their generous support of the Poet Laureate program, and the Poet Laureate Advisory Committee and the Owen Sound and North Grey Union Public Library. And as always, I'd like to acknowledge that this video is produced on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the three fires known as the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi Nations. I give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.